Welcome to the Beyond the Books channel. We continue our dive into Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl. Today, we examine the Secret Annex, focusing on the courage of the helpers, the complex logistics of supporting 8 people for 761 days, the timeline of their survival, and their eventual discovery. We look at some what-if scenarios on survival chances. We also look at the aftermath for the helpers. The group consisted primarily of Otto Frank's employees, who risked their lives to support the residents. Miep Gies. She was the primary link to the outside world, responsible for the daily grocery runs and finding black market suppliers. Bep Voskuijl, the youngest helper. She helped source milk and bread and provided Anne with essential companionship and educational materials. Johannes Kleiman and Victor Kugler. They managed the business downstairs, Opekta and Pektakon, while surreptitiously overseeing the annex's security and finances. The people who knew also included the warehouse manager Johannes Voskuijl was the father of the helper Bep Voskuijl. He built the revolving bookcase that hid the entrance to the annex in August 1942. He kept a watchful eye on the warehouse activities below. He left his job in 1943 after becoming terminally ill, which increased the residents' fear of discovery. 2 men, often referred to as B and D in the diary, were essential to the group's survival. They provided the illegal ration coupons needed to feed 8 people. Their arrest in early 1944 was a poignant moment of terror for the residents. Miep Gies, Miep's husband, was deeply involved in the resistance and visited the annex frequently. Cor Voskuijl, Bep's sister, she occasionally assisted with administrative tasks or sourcing supplies. Managing resources for a large group in a time of extreme scarcity required a blend of legal and illegal methods. In occupied Holland, food was controlled via ration cards. To feed 8 extra people who did not officially exist, the helpers had to obtain extra cards. They worked with 2 men referred to in the diary as B and D, who provided stolen or forged ration coupons. Miep Gies developed relationships with shopkeepers, who were sympathetic or willing to look the other way. They purchased lots of non-perishables like dried beans, split peas, and potatoes, which became the monotonous staple of their diet. During the final months, as shortages became oppressive, the residents were often forced to eat rotten or low-quality vegetables for weeks at a time. While Otto Frank saved money, the Van Dons also contributed by selling off their luxury items, such as Mrs. Van Don's fur coat, to fund the high cost of black market food. The helpers lived in a state of incessant fear. Under Nazi law, those caught aiding Jews faced concentration camps as well. The helpers had to be prudent about when they entered the annex to avoid being seen. The fact that they were discovered during an investigation into economic crimes, ration fraud, highlights just how dangerous the logistics of feeding the group actually were. Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman did face significant jail time after being arrested alongside the residents of the Secret Annex on August 4, 1944. Victor Kugler was imprisoned at the Amstelveen's Weg prison, and later the Wetteringshands prison in Amsterdam. In September 1944, he was moved to a concentration camp in Amersfoort. He was forced into labor and moved between several camps before escaping during a forced march in March 1945, just before the war ended. Johannes Kleiman was imprisoned at Amstelveen's Weg and Amersfoort, like Kugler. Due to extremely poor health, stomach ulcers, the Red Cross intervened, and he was released from the camp in September 1944. Despite his release, his health remained frail for the remainder of his life. Miep Gies was questioned by the police but was not arrested, partly because the officer in charge was an Austrian like her and showed leniency. Bep Voskuijl was also not arrested, likely because she was a younger employee and was able to slip away during the initial chaos of the raid. Miep and Bep were the ones who returned to the annex after the arrest to save Anne's papers and diary. The fact that the men and women faced such incessant danger and eventual imprisonment underscores the fortitude it took to be a helper during the Nazi pogrom. Residents of the Secret Annex survived in hiding for a total of 761 days, approximately 2 years and 1 month. To have reached the liberation of Amsterdam, they would have need to remain undiscovered for an additional 9 months in the annex to witness the end of the German occupation. Went into hiding July 6, 1942, discovery and arrest, August 4, 1944, liberation of Amsterdam, May 5, 1945. This period would have been their most difficult yet, as the winter of 1944-1945 in the Netherlands became known as the Hunger Winter. During this time, the oppressive lack of fuel and food led to widespread famine, meaning the helpers would have faced an almost impossible task in sourcing enough nutrition to sustain 8 people. The poignant tragedy of their story is often measured by how close they were to the end. They were deported on the very last transport to leave the Westerbork transit camp for Auschwitz. Anne and Margot died in Bergen-Belsen in February or March 1945. The camp was liberated by British forces on April 15, 1945. They were roughly 1 to 2 months away from surviving the camps, and 9 months away from being able to leave the annex freely. Margot had received a call-up to report for work in the East. If the Franks had not gone into hiding on July 6, 1942, they would have been forced to comply with Margot's deportation notice. 1942 was the peak of the final solution, meant a near certain and immediate death. In 1942, the selection process at Auschwitz was even more lethal for children and middle-aged adults than it was in late 1944. Approximately 75% of the Jewish population in the Netherlands was murdered, the highest percentage in Western Europe. Families who did not hide were almost universally caught during organized raids or forced to report to assembly points. Could they have survived longer elsewhere? Otto Frank had previously tried to secure visas to the United States or Cuba, but the incessant tightening of immigration laws made this impossible. Some historians argue that hiding separately rather than a group of 8 might have been less conspicuous. It would have robbed Anne and Margot of the solace and protection of their parents. The Secret Annex was actually a highly successful hiding place. They survived 761 days, which was longer than many other people in hiding managed. The survival chances without the annex would have been worse. The question of whether the Frank family would have had a higher survival rate if they had hidden alone is a complex paradox that historians and researchers still debate today. Fewer people, less noise. With 8 people living in a cramped space, the risk of accidental noise was incessant. Dropping a dish or walking heavily during the day when workers were in the warehouse below could have been fatal. Fewer residents would have meant fewer windows to monitor, potentially reducing the risk of a neighbor or passerby spotting a manifest sign of life. Resource management was a big impact to survival rate. The pressure cooker effect, Anne described the annex as a, quote, pressure cooker, where the high density of people led to constant discord and emotional friction. More people required more food, which increased the burden on the helpers, like Miep Gies. Providing for 8 people required surreptitious coordination of black market rations and increased the risk of the helpers being caught. Having 8 people vs 4 people, while it did cause a lot of strain, it also provides psychological support. While the Van Dons and Mr. Dussel often caused tumultuous arguments, they also provided a social circle. For Anne, Peter Van Don became a source of solace and a focal point for her emotional growth. If the Frank family had been entirely alone for 2 years, the psychological weight of the interminable silence and isolation might have been even more oppressive, potentially leading to lapses in judgment or, quote, cabin fever. If the Frank family had hidden alone, they would have been quieter and required fewer resources, which technically improved stealth. However, they would have lacked the shared fortitude of a larger group and the financial contributions the Van Dons made to their survival. Ultimately, the poignant tragedy is that regardless of the number of people, the systemic anti-Semitism and the reach of the Nazi pogrom made safety nearly impossible. The paradox of survival highlights that hiding offered stealth but lacked psychological support. The ubiquitous threat meant long-term safety was nearly impossible. The fortitude of the helpers, who faced immense danger and imprisonment, underscores their extraordinary courage against systemic evil. Thanks for joining us at Beyond the Book. Hope you enjoyed this deep dive.